Will Wright, podcaster, educator, doctoral candidate. Welcome to Reasonably Rational. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
So, seeing as you're a first-timer, maybe you can start us with the Will Wright autobiography. Of course, we'll be awaiting the print version whenever that comes out. But in the meantime, this will have to suffice.
All three people that will read it will love it. I was born in Canada, in Ontario. So I'm Canadian. My whole family is Canadian. And when I was 2, moved to North Carolina. And sort of by way of a spiritual autobiography, I was baptized Anglican. My godfather's an Anglican priest, and so we were Church of England. My mom was a lapsed Catholic. But moving to North Carolina when I was 2, totally fish out of water for us Canadians in the South. And so my dad was looking for somewhere to go. We went to an Episcopal church. He didn't think that was quite Anglican enough. He was more high church Anglican. And so we ended up at Catholic Church, St. Peter's. But how, I think, is always worth mentioning. It was a school discount if you're a parishioner.
Nice.
Yeah, so God gets you anyway.
Way to bait the hook.
Right. So that's what I first remember, really. I mean, I have one memory of going to the Episcopal Church when I was 4, but 5 years old, started at a Catholic school, and that's all I knew.
Do you have siblings?
Nope, just me.
Okay.
Just, only child. And I grew up in North Carolina, but my parents being Catholic, we'd say sorry, and then we'd say y'all. So it's kind of been an interesting mix there growing up. But going to Catholic school for 9 years, I was thinking about it actually in preparation for this conversation. My very first memory was my mom teaching me the sign of the cross when I was a kid, even before we became Catholic, right? So that was kind of interesting to think about. That's my first real vivid memory. And then in second grade, in learning in school, the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ. I said, of course it is. Why not? God can do whatever he wants. Who am I to say otherwise? So I always sort of believed in the Eucharist. But skipping forward, I had a very good childhood in North Carolina. We didn't have a lot growing up, but we had each other and a very strong family life, the three of us. And then I went to public high school, which was an experience, going from Catholic school with mostly Yankees, as we'd call them, to public school in rural North Carolina. A bit of a culture shock for me, but I had a blast with that. And then went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is really, I had a great experience in middle school. A great history teacher, great religion teacher. And my religion teacher in middle school was also my youth minister in high school. Oh. And he prepared me well. I mean, great man, Joe Ferris. I learned a lot from him. I learned from him to put the Eucharist at the center and to be Marian and to love the Mass.
That's a great set of coordinates to navigate by.
So
wow.
It was a great start. He was a great man. And but I was a twit. I mean, I was in high school. I like to say I was way left of center at the time. Watched CNN every morning. I would have slapped myself. Like if I had a time machine, I'd just go back and slap myself. But anyway, so I went to college, to UNC Chapel Hill, fairly liberal school, and got into the Newman Center pretty quickly. And then I went away for 3 weeks. I didn't go to Mass at all. It was the only time in my life that I didn't go to Mass. And it wasn't on purpose. It just sort of happened. There's other things that came up. And, with that discount when I was 5 to get into the school, the thing that got me back was free pizza. So never underestimate the freebies or the discounts. But my friends invited me. They were like, we're having a pizza party at Newman. You should come back. By the way, we need somebody to do music. And so I said, okay, well, I can help with that. And I like free pizza. And from that moment on, I haven't missed a Mass except for being very, very sick. And it's interesting because it's at UNC, really, that with my friends that I question the faith the most rigorously. not in a sort of mean-spirited way or I'm going to deny all this, but like, really, is this true? Am I actually Catholic? Is this something that I can stake a claim in and say, this is absolutely what I want to give my life to? Because I'm not the type to sort of halfway do anything. If I believe in something, I'm going to go all in. And so I started questioning all the different tenets of the faith. And thanks be to God, I had amazing, well-catechized friends at the Newman Center. It was sort of in spite of the staff, sadly. The staff was, let's see, one of the people started a prayer with, God, who we call Father and Mother. Yikes. Okay. So I definitely wasn't getting the faith there, but my friends, I'd ask them a question and they'd have solid answers. And well, that's interesting. And I think I said something sort of offhandedly one day. I said, well, obviously Jesus knows everything. And my friend said, well, in his divinity. I said, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, in his divinity, he knows everything. He's God. He's omniscient. But in his humanity, he only knows what's necessary. I said, it was the first time I had heard a theological distinction.
Yeah, that's a pretty sophisticated response.
Like, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And I really think that was the moment, unbeknownst to me, that I was going to start studying theology. At the time, I was very undecided in my major. I came into school as a history, poli-sci, math, religious studies. One of those is going to stick, probably, major. And I added economics. And I was an econ major for 2 years and decided I don't want to go to business school. I don't care about making a bunch of money, so this is not the right path for me. So I kept history. And I took my first philosophy class senior year of college, which was so sad because I loved it. And it was too late. So I took another the following semester. I said, well, I'm going to do something with this at some point, but let's wait and see. So I graduated with a history degree. And my faith was much stronger at that point. I guess I'll say politically, I went through a little bit of a journey as well. I was, like I said, left of center, pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage, all those things in high school. And when I got to UNC, I met a ardent communist, like a real one. And he really wasn't an authentic communist. And I had a conversation with him, and it scared the heck out of me. And I was like, I don't like this. And it caused me to question everything about liberalism, really, like even classical liberalism. It's like, I know they're not related, but there's just something, it seems like they're bedfellows at the moment, so I need to rethink this. So I'm taking these economics classes, and I learned about libertarianism. I said, oh, okay, this might be nice. I was a libertarian for the 10 worst days of my life. That's how I like to put it. It was really bad.
You actually have those 10 days circled on a calendar that you've kept with you in a bin somewhere.
Politically speaking, it was the worst I've ever felt. I was like, this is not a way to live. Come to find out later that actually Catholic Church teaching bears that out. It's true. You can be a libertarian or a communist. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not that.
What was it, just out of curiosity, what was it about libertarianism that was so awful?
I think it's just it was so insular, and it lent itself to anarchy. That because I try to follow things to their logical conclusions to the best of my ability, based on the data at hand, right? So I'm learning about libertarianism, and I'm thinking, okay, let people do, you do you, live your life the way that you want, as long as you don't hurt anyone else. Sounds nice, but then when you start following that out, you realize that's impossible. Because we live as a community. We're communal. We're social. So everything I do will affect. And I realized pretty quickly that this is not in line with the gospel in any way, shape, or form. So I was like, well, okay, I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a libertarian. Am I a conservative? Because up to this point, I thought they were, the arch enemy. I can't possibly be a conservative. I like people. I care about people. I love people. So I thought about, okay, I need to learn about just what is conservatism. So that was part of my kind of intellectual journey too. And so I would say now, much, much later now, I think I'm moderate, leaning right, something like that. I agree with liberals, quote unquote, on a lot of things. I agree with conservatives on most things. but very much a independent.
Did that political process, that political transformation, start by way of being a history major, or was that also part of the conversation with Catholic friends? And
I think in retrospect, it's because I do believe that God works providentially and works all things for the good, and so I think what he allowed me to do was go on this journey for 2 years of being an economics major, knowing I wasn't going to finish it. But in those 2 years, I got the basics of economics. The other classes that I still had to complete were the more fine-tuning, sort of going deeper into the topics. But I got enough of a survey of economics, and one of it was the history of economics, which I loved because I'm a history guy. So I took that and ran with it and just started learning more about the history of these different economic systems. And I would say that the transformation was probably more religious than it was economic or political. I've always tried very hard to put God first, country second, in that in the order of things, to make sure that I'm not saying, well, I'm going to do this politically and then think about religion next. Start with the gospel and then go from there. Where does that lead? What lends itself to being a follower of Christ? I didn't always have words for that, but in retrospect, I think that's what I was doing, in large measure because of these great people around me at the Newman Center who were helping me to kind of sift through things. And I don't agree with them on a lot of things either. I think they were a little too far. Many of them were in the more traditionalist category. But I mean, I thank God for them, because if it wasn't for them, I might not even be Catholic anymore. So God works in mysterious ways for sure. But after college, I had a history degree, which qualified me to work at Olive Garden. So I was
or Home Depot.
Or Home Depot. But I was a server at Olive Garden, and it was a year, and it was a great year. I actually loved it. To be honest, it was taking care of people. But again, providentially, what am I doing at Olive Garden? And my job after that was working at a parish. Those are very similar jobs. They're almost the same in a lot of respects. One serving people in terms of giving them food, but the way that they taught us at Olive Garden was that you're creating an experience for the guests.
Okay.
And so it's when you take some of the practical human skills of that, of creating a guest experience, and then you work at a parish and you're facilitating an encounter with the living God, you are you're setting up an experience for them. It's just a very good, better, best possible experience. So a lot of those skills did translate over, but I was doing music. I was working at a parish as I did liturgy and music and catechesis for adults and children and teens.
And this is still in North Carolina?
No, sorry, this is after undergrad. I moved to Phoenix. I moved here to Phoenix.
Okay, what brought you to Phoenix?
My parents moved out while I was in undergrad.
Okay.
And so I just, I had a couple things lined up after school. I was going to go and get a master's degree in education and teach history. And I got into a couple programs, one at Notre Dame, and I was inevitably waitlisted and dropped because there was no history positions to go with the program that year. So I got into the program, but I had to be dropped because they didn't have a job for me. So I said, okay, God, what are you trying to do here? Because I had just come to terms with my control issues a little bit, and like I was going to set my path, and God said, no, you're not. And so here I am in Phoenix, coming from North Carolina, which is a very different place, to then serve at Olive Garden for a while. And so somewhere in there, I decided, I'm going to go and get a master's degree in theology from Franciscan University. And so I started that in fall of 2014. And within a few weeks, the neighboring pastor, as I was at St. Clair's up in Surprise, Arizona at the time, the neighboring pastor invited me for lunch and said that he wanted me to start a children's catechesis program at his parish. And I said, well, I don't have a degree yet. He said, no problem. And by the way, we'll help pay for your degree. I said, okay, let's go. This sounds good. And so I ended up staying at the parish for 7 years, and it was a great time. Lots of lots of experience in a lot of different things, because working at a parish, you usually have a whole bunch of hats, as you know. And so it's, I was in charge of a lot of different volunteers. Over that time, I had a couple of employees that I oversaw. So it was really a director role. So experience that I never would have had in other contexts. So it was really tremendous experience. Finished the master's degree in 2019. And for the last few years, I've been teaching at St. John Paul II High School, teaching history and religion, and am now working on my dissertation to get a theology doctorate in theology, to hopefully be part of the new seminary that we have here in Phoenix, the master's level education. And over that time, I've been working with the Institute of Catholic Theology with Dr. Eric Westby very closely. And 10 years ago, I was married to my wife, Bridget, and we have 2 boys. And that's been a journey. So husband, father, teacher, doctoral candidate, all kinds of stuff, a musician. I laugh at that one because a few years ago, when I left parish ministry, I said, all right, I'm done with music. No more music. I'm going to teach. I have my weekends free, finally, be with my family. And for the last 2 years, more Sundays than not, I've been doing music, either at St. Thomas Aquinas or up at Prince of Peace in Sun City West. And it doesn't look like that's stopping anytime soon.
You tried to escape, yeah. Good luck.
He just keeps pulling me back in. So still very much active in music ministry, doing sacred music. So I'm all over the place doing a lot of things, and had a podcast for a while. It's still active, good distinctions, but haven't posted anything for a while, finishing up the dissertation. But good I'm all over the place.
Good Distinctions is, by the way, is really a great podcast.
Thanks.
I've enjoyed the episodes that I've listened to very much.
It's been fun.
You've got, so you know, of course, Dr. Ryan Hanning as well.
Mm-hmm.
He has a phrase that he uses, which I love and attribute to him. I told him I'd do that for like 3 years, then I'm going to drop the attribution and let people think I came up with it. But he talks about a conspiracy of grace. You know, just the journey that we're all on. You turn around, you look at the twisting, turning, the ups and downs, and you know, it's a script that you would never have written, could never have written, and would certainly have edited differently if it were up to you. But
yes.
It's this conspiracy of grace, you know, it's in the hands of providence. Looking back just on what you described, you know, sort of your autobiography, what for you, from where you are now, were some of the key moments that you look back at and realize that's a, I mean, some of them maybe you realize when you're in them too. We all have those kind of moments where like, I know this is a key moment. But then there's those that we kind of look back on and we're like, were it not for that, which I didn't recognize at the time, I wouldn't be where I am, or I wouldn't be who I am, or I wouldn't be married to who I'm married. I mean, those are always just fascinating to me, those little hindsight conspiracy of grace. Do you have any of those that stick out to you?
Oh, man, more than I can mention. I think it's like 1,000 little moments. Studying history, I look at cause and effect. I look at correlation, continuation, change and continuity. I mean, these are all themes that we talk about in class. And when I apply it to my own life, if any one thing was different, I wouldn't be here for various reasons. I think the biggest one, you know, the one that just popped in my mind, so I'll share it, is I wasn't even on the stage yet, so to speak. My mother went to the doctor, and the doctor told her that I was going to not make it to birth, that there was something seriously wrong with me. And if I was born, I'd have serious birth defects or be completely mentally handicapped, unable to live on my own, these sorts of things. So they said, you should abort your child. And my mother said, no. And she went to another doctor. Same thing, exact same thing. She went to a third doctor, got the exact same prognosis. And at that point, she said, listen, I'm going to have this child. If the child's healthy, and she, the way she tells it, he cut her off and said, listen, if the child's healthy, you can come back here and I'll give you my diploma off the wall. And the story would have been so much better.
Is this doctor number 3?
Yeah, and the story would have been so much better if my mom had gone back and gotten the diploma.
I was hoping
but
you
she
were
was
gonna say
too
that.
ticked off, so she didn't. But honestly, if my mother had not, if she had listened to any one of those 3 doctors, I literally wouldn't be here.
Wow.
So it's pretty remarkable and a testament to my mother's faith in God and also her love of life that I'm even here. So
she had to fight for you, literally.
Yeah, literally. So I mean that's pretty remarkable. But then everything else throughout life, the fact that it's the things that all came to mind when you asked the question. It's all things we might call bad things. The suffering that happened, right? So when I was 2, my grandmother was dying. My mom's mom was dying of cancer, and so it was already not a great year. But she was also a young nurse in Canada and in universal healthcare, and getting bumped off shifts, so she wasn't working. My dad was struggling to find work that paid well enough, so we were pretty poor. And she got this opportunity to move to North Carolina, of all places, to get a nursing job so that we could make ends meet. And so again, that would seem like this is a bad thing. This is suffering. This is a negative. And yet I never would have lived in North Carolina. And so that's quite literally my childhood. The place that I was raised and how I was formed and the friends that I had and all of those experiences, the church. I wouldn't be Catholic if we hadn't moved. I can tell you that. We would have kept being Anglican.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's pretty remarkable, like all these different moments. And then even in my own life, my wife and I have lost 3 children.
Oh gosh.
And we have 2 with us, but losing 3 children each time has felt different. And God has totally worked through all of those in ways that I could never imagine. And I've heard other people talk about their experience. Patrick O'Hearn, I don't know if you know him, he's a former Tan Books editor. He talks about this quite openly. He's written a couple books on it for men. And I think they just lost their 8th baby.
Gosh.
I might be wrong on the numbering, but it's at least like over 5 or 6. And I can't even imagine that. But he's so peaceful in it. I'm like, man, I wish I could be that peaceful. And I don't mind sharing this, but like it was a week ago we learned that we lost this 3rd baby, and I'm peaceful. I wasn't expecting that. We were talking before we started recording here. I didn't think that was coming, but I'm surrounded by an amazing community at St. John Paul II, where everyone is able to be there for me and my family, pray for us, talk to us. I can talk very openly about how I'm feeling, and there's 3 or 4 other guys who know exactly what I'm going through because they've lost children as well. So there's a grace there that I wouldn't have experienced had I not had this horrible loss.
There's an interesting solidarity in that. So we suffered a miscarriage in between number 3 and number 4. One of the obvious conspiracy of grace things that came out of that is, so Caleb, technically he's our number 5 because the baby we lost in front of him, but we got pregnant with Caleb 4 months after the miscarriage. So he's not here if the baby that we lost is, and like you try to even begin doing the math on that, and you're like, I'm glad I'm not God. I can't connect those dots. I'm not in charge of connecting those dots. I'm glad I don't have to. But one of the things that for us when we suffered the miscarriage was, and as a guy, you have sort of a natural obliviousness about all things pregnancy and childbirth and whatever. So it's not something I had thought much about. I had a cousin who, she and her husband, God love them, came out of the gates with 4 straight miscarriages, eventually figured some stuff out. But suddenly you're immersed in this situation, and you reach out to your community, and then just people come out of the woodwork. Yeah, so many people. I thought it was, I know it happens. I thought it was exceedingly rare. This can happen.
Yeah.
Almost never does, but gosh, and then you start talking to people, and like you said, people like Patrick O'Hearn, who've had 5, 6, 8, kind of just blew me away. Mm-hmm. And then the reality, and you were kind of sharing this too before we hopped on camera, but it is such a different experience for our wives, which inevitably there's, obviously her connection to that child in utero is just fundamentally different than our connection, and so the way the suffering works, and of course on top of that, there's all the hormones that go all over the place. It's a boy.
But even with that, we don't know. We try to be present to our wives, and we do what we can. But through all these, I learned this actually afterwards. I was looking at I think it was for history or religion, something. Mm-hmm. I was looking at divorce rates because I wanted to see whether it was the same, whether you're Catholic or not. Turns out it is, which I found kind of shocking. It's about 50%, which is very high. But the reasons were fascinating. Number one was money, which I don't think is actually money. I think it's communication. Mm-hmm. The second one is infidelity. And the third one was loss of a child.
This is for Catholics?
This is for everyone.
For everyone?
Across the board.
Really?
So that includes miscarriage. But what can happen is either it draws you closer as a couple or you split further apart.
Yeah.
And thanks be to God, I chose my spouse well. She loves God and she loves the Catholic faith. And so each time we suffer together, we grow together, which is one of the mysteries of marriage. And so it really has been a sort of interesting sort of experience. So when you ask, like, what are some of those moments, these moments of grace, it can be that. It can also be the great things, like you're saying, like if it wasn't for the first loss that we had, we wouldn't have our 4-year-old. Yeah. So I can't imagine life without him.
Right. Right.
He brings so much joy to everyone. So life is complicated and messy. And I was talking to one of my friends earlier this week, and we just said, it just confirms that we are not in control. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. Much as it would be nice sometimes. I'm not a huge control guy, but I would love to be a selective control guy. I'd like just let me pick the moments where I get to take the wheel, I get to punch in the coordinates, and then most of the time I'll hand it back to you, God, and you can, but they just, I tell people, in prayer you're supposed to practice silence and contemplation, receptive prayer. I'm like, I am not great at that. People who know me are not at all surprised to hear that. I'm like, I go to pray, and there's just so many things I think Jesus needs to know, and I'm just the guy to tell him. So how did you and Bridget meet?
Catholic match, actually. We were
nice. Okay, I know a bunch of people who have. Well,
that's good because I haven't met anyone that it was actually a good.
I got to remember who some of them are and tell you, because you're not the first one. There's like a bunch of folks I know.
Not to dump on Catholic match. I mean, it's literally how I met my spouse. So I love it, but I've heard so many bad experiences.
Well, I have heard some of the.
But yeah, and that's another one of those moments of grace, and just the timing. Is I'm in Phoenix. I don't know anyone. And the reason I got on Catholic Match in the first place was because I lived in Surprise 12 years ago. There's a lot of older folks in Surprise at the time. It's a little different now.
For those of you who don't know the greater Phoenix metro area, Surprise is not exactly a hub of young
retirement community, more or less. It's better now, but at the time. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll get on Catholic Match. But my wife was a travel nurse at the time, and her sister lived here in town. And so she had come in for her, I think it was like a 8 to 13 week contract. So this is a pretty short window when you're talking about dating. So Catholic Match, I got on there. I met her in the first couple weeks that she was here in town, and she decided to extend her contract, and then she stayed, and here we are.
Wow.
So it was a fascinating turn of events.
Oh, let's see there. Yeah, the totally conspiracy of grace.
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. So you were talking about as you're describing your process through your undergraduate degree, it's eerily similar to my own. So I was an English lit major after being a I have no idea major. And I picked English lit because I like to read. And so I figured, well, I have to get a degree in something. It's not going to be math or science. So I was an English major and a history minor. I also took my first philosophy class. I got there one semester ahead of you. I took it the second semester of my junior year and had the exact same reaction. I'm like, oh, shoot.
Yeah, this
I
is
should have
great.
been a philosophy major. What am I doing? And there's no way. I'm not tacking on. I was already financing my education like all great financial geniuses do.
I'm still paying for my
Yeah,
college.
well, hey,
yeah.
I finally paid mine off at 42
Well, that's
with
good.
5 kids. So yeah, our oldest son is in college. Number 2 is headed. I willingly use dear old dad as the how not to. I'm like, so listen, if you want to pay off your student loans at the age of 42 with 5 children, hop in line, right? I can show you the path up that mountain. If you'd like a different outcome, which I strongly recommend, you might want to just run in the opposite direction of how I did it. But I still love English literature. I enjoyed being in English literature major, although, as you point out, when I graduated from college, what my English lit degree qualified me to do was to become a telemarketer.
Great.
So I actually, this will date me a bit, but I sold long distance phone service over the phone.
That's great.
After my first summer doing that, I told my younger brother, I said, the easy, because he's like, how is it being a telemarketer? That seems like it would be kind of a crummy job. I'm like, basically I get paid to annoy perfect strangers for 8 hours a day. That's
You put it that way. That sounds pretty
it's
fun.
not materially different than if I dressed up as a clown and just rode an elevator poking people with a stick. I serve, no, but that was my English lit degree. I had that same experience with philosophy and just thought, oh man, this was so, what was it? First of all, what was it about history that drew you? Because I had a history minor and loved the history classes. And what was it about philosophy?
Very much related. In middle school, I had an amazing history teacher. His name was Joe Hughes, and he discerned with the Franciscans for a while when he was younger, and then he met his wife, and left discernment, went and got married, and came to work in Greenville, North Carolina. Was a history teacher for a long time at school there, and he was just incredible. I mean, I've never met anyone who can match his style and do it well. I mean, I don't even attempt it. He does this. He goes in and he writes 15 to 20 terms on the chalkboard on the left side, just a list of words. No textbook, nothing at all, no handouts. And he comes in, and for the entire period, he would just tell us a story about history, just dramatic. At one point, he was talking about geocentrism. He had a globe, a blow-up globe, gave it to the person in the middle of the room, and he stood on the desks and walked around the thing, and he's like 6'5". He's a tall guy. So like that sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
Or like he was talking about Xerxes, the Persian king, and he'd make this X and go Xerxes. And it was just like kind of goofy, but it was so engaging. And then every Friday we'd have our atlas, our Rand McNally World Atlas, and we'd have to draw a country. And so 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we drew the whole world. And we had to put 5 rivers, 25 cities, the capital. We had to do topography, shading with colored pencils. Huh. I mean, I know geography.
Wow.
Because of this man. He taught me how to write a research paper. So it was just phenomenal. And then in high school, not to be outdone, I had amazing history teachers at this rural school in North Carolina. Just one after the other, excellent history teachers that made it really engaging and real, and like this is the story of humanity, it's people. And that's the kind of energy that I try to bring to my own classroom now. Is, I tell my students directly. I say, we're studying human beings with strengths and desires and weaknesses and goals and aspirations and shortcomings, and the only thing that hasn't changed over all of human history is human nature. And, at St. John Paul II, we can speak freely about the truth. And so we talk about the human person, and we talk about these perennial truths, and weave in church history, and it's tons of fun. But it's real, and it's exciting. And even the boring stuff, I find exciting, the quote unquote boring stuff, like economic stuff. But I like economics. So, because again, it's about people. If you think about economics, because I mention economics to my students and I say, what's economics? And they say, well, it's money, it's finances. I'm like, no, finances is finances. Economics is the study of scarcity. I've got something you want and you don't have it. How are you going to get it? And they're like, whoa, I guess warfare. I'm like, yeah, maybe. So it's just exciting. Like, there's a drama, there's a narration. So I love that. I love that it is interesting. There's a story. It's our common humanity. And of course, the focal point of history is the cross. So for me, there's really no distinction between history is applied theology if it's done right. If you have a good Christian anthropology. So, or the study of the people of God, you could put it that way. But what I loved about philosophy was at UNC, the first class I took wasn't as good. So it was a good intro, and it was Introduction to Philosophy. And this will probably make you cringe. It was Descartes and Hume and all these guys, and that was the Intro to Philosophy.
Right, the great founding fathers. No one had ever done it before them.
Like last 500 years of crap, but that's fine. So we did read some Plato and Aristotle and all that, so it wasn't all bad. That was the first time I had read selections from the Republic. Learned about Plato's idea of the philosopher king. So there was good stuff that came from it. But that whole section on the modern philosophers, I was just like, well, I know what I don't like. And it's all of this. Right. Just skepticism with no foundation. Gross. But the second class I took was ethics, Introduction to Ethics. And it was this graduate student from Georgetown who was on a sabbatical at UNC. And he was one of the best teachers I've ever had. He was super energetic, really engaged in the topic, had this booming voice, and he would spend the entire class period talking about a ethical framework, consequentialism or virtue ethics or whatever. And by the end of the class, he would make you think it's the only rational system that could possibly work. He was so good. I almost was a consequentialist by the end of the class. I was utilitarianism, absolutely. This sounds great. Sign me up. I'm the next Jeremy Bentham. But at the end of the class, just 2 minutes, he'd decimate it.
Oh, wow.
It was fascinating. And every single time he'd line them up and he'd knock them down.
Wow.
And I was like, this is so cool.
That would be so fun.
So for me, as someone who likes history and likes hearing rational arguments, and to hear him set up everything and it sounds so good, and then to just say, nope. Wow, okay. This is different. This is something I've never seen before. And I realized, okay, philosophy is a love of wisdom, the philosophia, and but it's just thinking clearly. It's speaking intelligibly about the world. So again, it was in that same vein with history. It's like, okay, I want to be able to talk about history, but I got to have good principles. First things first, second things second. And it's philosophy. And I think that really came out when I was studying theology, is that philosophy is the language that theology often uses. And so we had to learn quite a bit of philosophy. Honestly, in my mind, not enough. I think I only had to take one philosophy class for Franciscan as a prereq. I don't think is nearly enough. There should be way more. But on my own, I studied quite a bit extra, and I just fell in love with it. I thought this is fascinating.
Yeah. I love that connection between history and philosophy. Ideas move people, people move history.
Right.
And so, crack open a person who's doing anything, who's affecting something, who's making some sort of, every person is a pebble in the pond of history. We all get dropped. We cause ripples, some of us little ripples, some of us big ripples. And of course, none of us ultimately see where the ripples go and what other ripples they intersect with. That's the great mystery of the human drama as it unfolds over the centuries. But ideas move people, and I always found that exact connection fascinating, because if you look at people through the lens of history, you see that there are ideas that move them, and sometimes ideas that are movements themselves, that move nations, that move empires. But if you look at it from the other end through the lens of philosophy, you also see from the end of the ideas where that's likely to go when it actually gets on the ground and starts moving. That'll affect people, that'll change people, that'll reprioritize things. It'll eventually make its way into politics, which of course, both Plato and Aristotle are very keen to point out this. This eventually begins to form the way the polis is formed, and that forms the citizens, and it sets a worldview. All that stuff is just fascinating. What was it that made you decide to do the master's in theology, and what was it that made you decide to do the doctorate? What's your doctorate? What are you focusing on too?
I'll start with the master's. So, I guess putting it in terms that I would use now, I don't really remember what I was thinking at the time, but I think in retrospect, philosophy is sort of thinking clearly about the world. And like you said rightly, that ideas shape people, people shape the world. What if a person is the idea, capital I, the logos, the thought, the word, the speech, the idea? And I was convicted of that anything that I was doing, Jesus has to be the center of it. And I mean that historically. Like, Catholicism is a historical religion. It's one of two, Judaism being the first and Catholicism being the sequel, so to speak. But there's this rootedness in history that you just simply don't have elsewhere. And so watching like this ethics person like set up these great ideas and then knock them down, I remember thinking at the time, why hasn't Catholicism been knocked down in my mind? It sounds good too. I had almost like this existential crisis of like, it's been good so far. What's going to be that thing that knocks it down?
Right.
And then I realized, no, it's not going to be knocked down because it's not mine. It's not human. The church is divine. Well, once that went click, it was like, my life has to be at the service of that. I don't know how. I was involved with youth ministry as soon as I finished college. So I thought maybe it would be something in that. Maybe I'd be a youth minister. Maybe I didn't know. I was very open. I was young. So young, such an idiot. But not that I'm much less of an idiot now, but a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more age. So
you're much better educated.
Yeah, much better educated idiot. Right. So I'm getting the master's in theology, and I just love it. I love studying the faith. I love the work of theology. And this is not to knock Franciscan University. It's a great place. Even in the master's program, I didn't feel like I was studying theology. I felt like I was studying church doctrine. There's nothing wrong with that. But as I'm doing this, I'm reading documents like from the International Theological Commission saying, here's what a theologian is. And a theologian is someone who kind of operates in that space of speculation. Not saying that it's all speculative, but like St. Paul says, studying the mystery in its length and breadth and depth and width. And up to that point, I'm studying the catechism. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm so glad I did. It was a great basis. But after I finished the master's degree, I knew I wanted to get a doctorate. There's something, there was this voice telling me that like the church needs more doctorates. Oh, it was Eric Westby. That's what it was. It was the voice of Eric Westby.
He'll be pleased that you conflated him with the voice of the church.
It was, but honestly, I remember I was driving Dr. Scott Hahn around when he was here for a talk because Eric asked me to. And Dr. Hahn had mentioned like the church needs more PhDs. And I asked Eric about that. I was like, that's an interesting thought. And he said, well, I think you could, like you should. And so, I give a lot of credit to him. I even said this to my wife yesterday, like he's a large part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I really do owe him a lot. I hope he's not going to watch this because his head get bigger. But, but he's a great man, and he really did kind of set me on that trajectory. But I was trying to figure out, what am I going to study? what's my topic going to be? Because it's supposed to be something where no one's talked about it before.
Mm-hmm. You make an original contribution, yeah.
Well, what the heck am I going to do in theology? That's our brand. We haven't changed anything in 2,000 years. So I'm thinking to myself, this is impossible. How can I possibly contribute something to the realm of theological inquiry that hasn't already been done to death? And I certainly don't want to do anything novel, because that's a surefire sign you're a heretic. So I'm like, all right, well, what still needs to be figured out? And so I thought, all right, I'm just going to look in my own life and see what kind of things are questions that my friends are asking, that my family's asking, that people that I interact with at the parish are actually wondering about. Because I want it to be practical. I mean, I worked in a parish for 7 years. I am a catechist. Like, I'm never going to stop being a catechist.
Yeah.
So it's got to be academically rigorous, but it also needs to be practical. And so a few things came up. One was the split between the East and the West in the church. Always been fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Byzantine Divine Liturgy. And so I thought maybe I'd get into that a little bit more.
Historical aspect to that too, of course, yeah.
Well, and theologically too, like just trying to do sort of a rapprochement between Eastern and Western, like cataphatic and apophatic inquiries. And for those, that's highly technical. I'll probably explain that. But like one of them is like the East is really keen on the mystery. Like we won't know everything. God's revealed a lot, and we should meditate on it, contemplate, but allow the mystery to be a mystery. Whereas in the West, there's sort of this almost hyperfixation at times in history of over-defining, like really drilling down. I think the East sort of parodies this with the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas, which I love, but they look at it as over-defining. And certainly, I mean, St. Thomas made a few errors, like with the Immaculate Conception, but that's because he didn't have all the data. If he was alive now, he certainly wouldn't have disagreed with the church. So I think there's merit to both, and we need both. That's what St. John Paul II talked about with breathing with both lungs.
Both lungs, yeah.
So that whole thing, I mean, I love that. So I think that was one thing I really wanted to look at. Another thing is I have a lot of people near and dear to my heart that are traditional Catholics, quote unquote, for lack of better terms. And I have some friends who are much more progressive. And I think they're both wrong. And so I think in a lot of things, I think obviously like wrong on different things. And perhaps there's more of a doctrinal issue with the progressive side of things, but there's certainly some issues on the traditionalist side of things. And I've had to work through that myself. I mean, I definitely would have described myself as a traditionalist for a long time, at least a few years. But the more I learned about the Mass, especially the more I learned about Vatican II, take a little bit different view. I think I'm much more comfortable describing myself in the communio lens of like Ratzinger and Balthasar and them now. Certainly wasn't the case a couple of years ago, but I would say that now. But even that is like, okay, the way that we approach theology separates people. And that doesn't seem right. It's not just the East and the West, but even within Roman Catholicism, there's these huge gaps between people where, well, I'm in this camp and you're in this camp. And I didn't like that. And all the liturgy wars, I just feel like it's so self-defeating and frankly divisive and satanic. So I thought, okay, well, there's got to be something in liturgy then. And I came across this one line in a book I was reading on the liturgical revisions after Vatican II. And the author mentioned this little booklet from the Society of St. Pius X that said very plainly, and this is their theology, it's from their priests, so I'm not misrepresenting it. They said that the Mass is the representation of the passion of our Lord, not his resurrection. And I thought well, first of all, that's not true, but I couldn't explain it. And it just didn't seem right. But I also know people, and I think, Bishop Dolan has said this publicly, like we're a people of the resurrection. We should stand in the joy of Easter, and that the Mass makes the resurrection present. And that's true. But it also makes the cross present. And so what's the balance here? So it seemed like, and I have met people who go much, much further than Bishop Dolan's comment, which is basically what St. John Paul II said. We're an Easter people and Hallelujah is our song.
Right.
We have to, the resurrection is part and parcel of being Christian. But I know people who have gone so far as to say that we shouldn't even have crucifixes because Jesus is not dead, he's alive. And it's this theological sort of issue of we're not getting the point of what is the Paschal Mystery, what is the suffering, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. And then beyond that, how do we actually take part in the Mass? How do we enter into the Mass? So I had all these ideas circling around in my head, and basically over the course of a year, and just talking to a lot of people, basically what I boiled it down to with my dissertation advisor was, there hasn't been enough work done on the Paschal Mystery as a theological unified whole. The fact that it's not just the cross, it's not just the resurrection,
Right.
It's the suffering, death, resurrection, and ascension. People often forget the ascension, but that's important too.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the incarnation needs to be talked about more intently with that, and Pentecost. So there's this unified salvific event, which is the person of Jesus, that's the interpretive key to actually understand how you and I participate in the life of grace and in the liturgy. And so then the second part of that question was, well, what does it actually mean when the Second Vatican Council in Sacrosanctum Concilium says that the aim to be considered before all else is the full conscious and actual participation of the people in the Mass, in the liturgy? I've had people answer that question in as many ways as there are people.
Yeah.
And I thought, for such an important topic, for something that is actually the focal point, I think the focal point of Vatican II. It is the number one most important aim in the very first document of the council. That's how they started. The bishops, the fathers of Vatican II said, that's the aim to be considered before all else. Well, if that's true, we should know what that is.
It would
right?
be helpful.
Like,
Sure.
it's now 2025 and we have no real definition of what active participation in the liturgy is. Hold up.
Yeah.
I found my topic, right? So I finally realized, okay, that's the niche. That's the niche. That's the place that's missing the theological analysis we need. So I got really excited and I was like, I started feverishly writing this proposal. So basically I focused on two things while I was doing research. One was the Paschal Mystery itself, the theology of the Paschal Mystery, which you might not know this, the term itself, Paschal Mystery, was not used before the mid-1900s
I did not know
in a
that.
church document.
No, I did not know that.
It was used by Melito of Sardis early on. And Pasch and Pascha and Paschal, that's all been used, but the term Paschal Mystery is only about 75 years old.
Wow.
So the theology is not fully developed. There's more connections that God wants to show us. It's nothing new. The reality behind the theology is,
Of course.
is 2,000 years old.
Yep.
But the theology needs to be developed in a way that we can continue to unpack this great mystery and apply it to our lives. Because, well, not even just apply it, but enter into it. Because what I'm convinced of is active participation. I'm still in the midst of writing it, so I don't have a soundbite for you. I don't have a sentence or two, but I know that two things are involved. If the Paschal Mystery is the interpretive lens by which we understand active participation, then the constituent elements, the ways by which you and I enter into that Paschal Mystery, are the baptismal priesthood and deification. Those are the two bookends. Right? So the baptismal priesthood, by being baptized, we enter into the body of Christ. We become priest, prophet, and king.
Yep.
And so by sharing in the universal priesthood of Christ, we offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, as St. Paul says in Romans 12. And by doing that, we enter into a life of grace. We die with Christ, we rise with Christ, and we're initiated into being able to offer the sacrifice of our lives, which culminates in the Mass. And so we can't enter into the Eucharist without baptism. I think everybody knows this. Like, I'm not saying anything new.
Yeah.
But we have to understand it in those terms if we want to live it. Because it's one thing to just go to Mass and say, well, I'm going to, I mean, to pardon the expression, receive my spiritual vitamin pill of the Eucharist, right? It's so transactional. And it's about a relationship, not a transaction. But when we realize that through baptism we become a son or daughter of God, we enter into this life of grace and we offer ourselves as an acceptable and living sacrifice, with the source and summit being the Eucharist, that's totally different. That's a totally different framing.
Yeah.
But where does it go? Is it just that we receive Christ and we're in union with him? Yeah. But every Mass, there's an eschatological reality where we're oriented towards the end. We're oriented towards Christ's second coming. We're oriented towards our judgment. We're oriented towards heaven. It's a foretaste of heaven. But outside of space and time, these realities of the past, of the cross, and the future of the eschaton, the end, collapse in, and we're there. So it's not just that it's a foretaste of heaven, it's that we're experiencing, in a mystical way, the end of all days at every single Mass.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also at the foot of the cross at every Mass. We're also at the empty tomb at every Mass. So it's all these things. So keeping that unified Paschal Mystery event, which we enter into through the baptismal priesthood, has to be ordered towards divinization or theosis, this idea of becoming more like God. Like St. Athanasius said, God became man so that man could become God. Mm-hmm. And this happens preeminently through the liturgy and through our active participation in the liturgy. So it all goes together.
I'm so glad that that's what you're working on. As a cradle Catholic, growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was a particular understanding of active participation in the liturgy, which was more people doing more stuff more of the time. And however, in the end, that shakes out as far as the should, shouldn't, that's good, that's too far. There was no coherent guiding principle,
right?
And it was, and I say that even as a kid, you could sense the sort of thinly veiled chaos in liturgy, in the Catholic. And I grew up in a particular place in a particular time. I was raised in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee under Archbishop Rembert Weekland. There's some infamy there that probably showed up in the way things were done. Inevitably there was, but the sense of it's kind of a grab bag, and it kind of feels like a lot of this is being made up on the fly. It certainly feels and sounds and looks often as though the tail is wagging the dog, or the inmates are kind of running the prison here, or and a lot of times the point of all that being. When I hear you say, I don't know that we have a great handle yet on what full active conscious participation in the liturgy means, my inward voice just says, amen, brother. That is so very true and so very necessary, because like you said, it is. I read Sacrosanctum Concilium for the first time. Actually during COVID. That's what spurred me to. I read a whole bunch of stuff for the first time during COVID on kind of my own personal wrestling match with the church's response, et cetera, et cetera. Sacrosanctum Concilium shocked the heck out of me,
right?
Because it's one of those documents, and you've had the same experience, I think we all have as Catholics, where, and as someone who's, I taught theology for a Catholic high school too, and been involved in parish work and catechesis. It's one of those documents where you've heard a lot about it, and you don't realize how much telephone game there was in it until you read the document itself, and you're like, oh my actual goodness.
Yeah.
This is not at all what I was. And you realize too, the person that you heard, whatever you heard about Sacrosanctum, they hadn't read it either. They were repeating what it literally is kind of like this telephone game. Yeah. So I'm very glad to hear that you are digging into that question.
Yeah. Well, and that everybody's got to have a job. Everybody's got to do something. Mm-hmm. It's called Ratzinger, Pope Benedict refers to it as liturgical activism. I think it's the right way to put it.
That's a great
But
line.
he's much more into like this interiorism about being, as he calls it, logified, like letting the logos make us like him. And so it's very much an internal participation. And the approach that I'm taking in the dissertation is that I call it the integrative approach, which is just a fancy way of saying the Catholic both and. I'm not going to throw anything good away. So I agree with Pope Benedict that the interior is very important. But I also agree with some others in the 80s and 90s who were speaking about, you should sing. You should do the responses. You should stand and sit and kneel and do the things that are asked bodily, because we have bodies. And so I think that's right and good as well. So there's an active element, there's an internal element, or exterior, interior, whichever way you want to put it. But it's the same sort of thing, again, with that Paschal Mystery lens. It's the cross and the resurrection. Yeah. And where the rubber meets the road, it's like I'm involved with music in parishes, so I am guilty of certain things that I now would think are terrible. And, big fan of Gregorian chant, but that wasn't always the case. I love traditional hymnody. I also love Anglican hymnody, frankly. I mean, there's some great Anglican hymns from the 1800s that everybody thinks are good traditional Catholic hymns. They're Anglican, but, everybody's all over the place.
Yeah.
But I had a great conversation with Thomas Quackenbush from Floriani.
Oh, yeah.
And he was on my podcast, and we talked for like 2 hours about sacred music. So it was a great conversation, but all those guys had the same sort of discovery that I did. It's that once you dig into the documents of the church, there's so much on sacred music that we've been, frankly, robbed of.
Had no idea. Yep.
So everyone's saying, or everyone who is listening to this so far has already heard me say I'm not a traditionalist, but that doesn't mean I don't love tradition. So don't misunderstand me there, anybody, but there is some legitimate diversity, but when it comes to especially music, this colors the Mass for good or ill. I mean, it does. Same thing with preaching. The priest and the musician have probably an outsized role now after the liturgical reformations, not renewal, if you want to put it that way, but there's more that's allowed now in terms of music. And so anyone who says, well, this instrument's not allowed or this instrument's not allowed, they are. It's up to the bishop. So we need to make sure we stay in our lane, which is another thing that I'm trying to do in this dissertation, which is difficult sometimes.
We'll pray for you.
Thank you. My dissertation...
Will Wright, keeping Catholics in their lane.
Well, my advisor put it this way. He was like, if the National Catholic Reporter and the trads hate you, you've done a good job. I said, great, good. Not the Register, the Reporter. Yeah. So that's what I'm aiming for, is just tick off everybody. But when it comes to music, if that's one of the ways that the lay people participate most readily, then we have to be careful. And so doing songs that are self-glorifying or inward focused at the very least, it's not appropriate for Mass. And there's principles for that. So it's not subjective. There are rubrics, and the GERM the General Instruction on the Roman Missal is pretty clear on a lot of these things. Sacrosanctum Concilium, like you said, blows your mind when you read it. And it says that organ has pride of place and Gregorian chant is preferred, and the use of Latin should be retained. What? I wasn't told that. Yeah. I was told we got rid of all that.
Right.
So it's pretty fascinating. But I'll use the example of my own parish of St. Thomas Aquinas. We have a few different things going on. The Mass over the summer I've been doing the 8:30, and I asked the music director, I said, do you want me to keep the sort of more traditional Schola vibe going? He said, absolutely. And so I'm doing the entrance, offertory, and communion antiphons in English, but still chanting. I do the Mass 8 Gloria in Latin, the Kyrie in Greek, the Sanctus and the Agnus Dei and the Mortem Tuum in Latin, and it's all chanted. And then after communion, we do a post-communion hymn of praise, because that's what's called for in the rubric. So I switch a little bit more to hymnody. And then recessional, this might shock people, there is no recessional hymn in the rubrics. When Mass ends, Mass ends. When the priest says, go forth, the Mass is ended, or the deacon, and then he reverences the altar, there's nothing else in the rubrics.
Wow.
So the recessional hymn doesn't exist. In the past, at a high Mass, they might have done a Marian antiphon, like certain seasons of the year. During Easter, it's the Regina Caeli, the Ave Regina Caelorum, the Salve Regina, these types of there's 4 Marian antiphons that are seasonal. But the recessional hymn, there's a little bit more freedom, if you will. So the post-communion hymn of praise and the recessional hymn, we do hymnody. But in my mind, like, that's a pretty balanced liturgy. No one should be really upset by that. I'm sure somebody is. There's always somebody. But then at the other Masses, we have a little bit more of a blended hymnody, or even one of the Masses is a more contemporary setting, all reverent, very attentive to the words of the songs. So I think that really, especially, I mean, this is just coming from me as one guy, take it or leave it, people who work in parishes, but wherever you are and wherever you want to be, just take people a step at a time. Because one of the things that I think is the worst thing that you can do is change things too quickly without proper catechesis.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened after Vatican II, and it was a nightmare.
Right.
So to go back, even in a correct direction, too precipitously, you'll lose people.
Yeah,
and
liturgical
you wouldn't
whiplash.
have to.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to. You'd do it slowly and methodically and with proper catechesis. So really, that's what I'm trying to aim at, is just let's find that both and approach. Because frankly, not to keep dumping on the trads, but there's a really an either or sort of mentality that I get from a lot of people who would label themselves as traditionalist, which is frankly Protestant.
Either what or what?
Whatever the topic is. You know, it's either you're this or you're that. So
meaning it's just
you
very
do this
stark and black and white.
Well, right. You do this specific aesthetic thing. It's got to be architecture. If it's not Baroque, it's not Catholic. Well, that's obviously nonsense, because there's all kinds of other architectural styles. I haven't met a lot of people like that, but they do exist. Same thing with music. That's why I was talking about the music. If it's not Gregorian chant in Latin, then it's illegitimate. I've met people that said that piano in liturgy is illegitimate, because Trali Solicitudini from Pius X in 1907 said that there shouldn't be piano. Well, it's been a while since 1907, and there's been a lot of liturgical law since then. So I guess my main point with that is not to say that any one camp is wrong. It's to say, are you sure? And that's really the question I'm trying to ask anybody who I talk to in person is, are you sure that's what the church teaches? Or is that just what you like? Because it's fine if that's what you like, and I probably like it too. I like more traditional elements. I go into a beautiful Baroque style church with all the gilded gold stuff, and I'm right at home. I love that. I love the Byzantine style. That's my favorite. I walk into a Byzantine church with this explosion of color and icons and the iconostasis and all that, and it just warms my heart. I love it. But it's one thing to have preferences and opinions, and it's another thing entirely for it to be the only legitimate thing, because it's probably not true.
Yeah. Putting a historical overlay on that question of liturgy, where it's at, where it's been recently, where it's likely to go. I'm not asking to play the prophet and predict the future, but there's a context for all of this, for this conversation, which of course does unfortunately on both sides too often break down into just divisiveness and snark and whatever, lack of charity. Looking at it through a historical lens, what's your sense of kind of where that's coming from, what's going on, Well, and I asked that partially because I think I'm probably in a fairly similar position. We have lots of friends who have moved into the traditional Latin Mass community. Most of whom I would say are still fine with Novus Ordo. It's not their preference. I mean, they're where they are for a reason, but they're not throwing stones back at where they were until recently, sort of thing. But then I do know a couple who have really, really marched into the very black and white, cut and dried. It's the most they can do is kind of with gritted teeth grant that I suppose it's technically valid by the skin of its teeth, but it's just inferior on every. I get the sense. I say that simply, and then I should say, I mean, in the interest of giving equal airtime and balancing my observations, I also know people, certain generations in particular, whose idea of liturgy and what it should be and how it should be done is still so completely over the wall and off the reservation that and they also cast aspersions. They also get very snarky and very uppity about stuff in a much more kind of lax sort of way, but there's no less vitriol in it. I get the sense that in both directions, there's something of a pendulum swing, something of a reaction against something. I get the sense on the very vehement traditionalist side, there's also an element of a deep frustration with what was allowed to happen. And whether there's even people around that you can lay the blame for that at the foot of anymore is a different question. But anyway, that's a rambling non-question, but there's a historical context to it that I know you've thought about some. What's just kind of your take on it? And you've, like you said, you would have probably called yourself a traditionalist, maybe not in the total, burning edge of.
No, I was there. So I was there for a time.
Then maybe from that perspective too, what was it that you saw that caused you to rethink and move off of that position a little bit too, I guess?
I think it's a great thing to think about, and it's a complicated question. Historically, the more that I learned about the liturgy, like just the history of the liturgy, the more I realized that what we have now is, it's the only time in human history we've had it, in that globalization and mass communication is a reality now. There was a time, I'll start with this. St. Bernard of Clairvaux once wrote a letter to his friend in Rome and said, "Can you please tell me the name of the Holy Father that I might mention him in the Eucharistic prayer?" Like, he didn't even know who he was. Like, we don't get that. We don't have that concept in our minds. So for a large part of the history of the church, we have all these different liturgical camps. And this is another reason I love the East and the West, is we have 24 Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, fully Catholic. It's not just the Roman rite. And I think that's where I moved away from the more radical traditionalism, is when I really started learning more about the East and these legitimate and beautiful and ancient liturgical practices that had their own issues in the past. I mean, the Ruthenians went through it in the 1800s, but they're done now. So they're just kind of, as the kids would say today, they're vibing. They're doing all right. But you look back through the history, and when Pius V in 1570 promulgated the Tridentine Missal, the Roman Missal, after the Council of Trent, what that was is the missal that the Roman Curia would use when they were in town. It was a curial mass, so the cardinals when they would come for their curial responsibilities in Rome, would celebrate the mass with that local Roman missal. And that's why it's called the Roman Missal. It's not just Roman because it's the Roman rite. It's Roman because it was from the city of Rome. And we lose sight of the fact that before that, every single diocese had their own missal. But we just have no concept of that. But that was the truth. That's exactly why you have all of these different Gallican prefaces that are brought into the 1570 Missal, because in France, every single diocese had their own missal, sometimes multiple missals. And I think, again, I don't want to say it's all technology, or the trads will call me a modernist. A little joke. But anyway, it's without the printing press, you can't have mass copies of the same missal. It's just not practical. So every diocese had their own missal. Every bishop was the chief liturgist of his diocese. That's still true, but our mechanisms are different now. But once 1570 comes along, historically, we're dealing with the Protestant Reformation, Protestant Revolution, if you want to call it that. I call it the Protestant Deformation, because it really did a horrible number on the church.
Yeah.
And the church historically went into fortress mode. And so the changes were fairly minimal over the course of the next 400 years. There were, I want to say, 3 revisions to the Roman Missal, and most of them were because of the accumulation of saints. The church marches on, there's new canonized saints, where do you fit them in the calendar? And so it was a liturgical year question. There was also some added prayers. The 1570 Missal, for example, if you're someone who goes to the traditional Latin Mass and you use the 1962 Missal, you'll know that the beginning has the Ad introibo altare Dei, like I go up to the altar of God, the Psalm 42 at the beginning. That's a vesting prayer that was done in the sacristy. It's actually not part of the 1570 Missal. It's something the priest would do before Mass. Well, priests started doing it in front of everyone so regularly that it just became part of the Missal. It's sort of like the Leonine prayers at the end of Mass, the prayers at the foot of the altar, the St. Michael's prayer and the Salve Regina and all that, became part of the Missal because Pope Leo said, do this. And rightly so. I mean, the legend has it with his vision of Satan sort of taking over the world and St. Michael doing battle with him, which I don't think is a legend. I think that was a true grace. And historically, there's so many other things like Fatima and all these other moments throughout the last 400 or 500 years that, the church has been doing battle against the evil one. And in a large measure, and not to be too anti-ecumenical, Protestantism bears the brunt of being the number one big bad for the last, since 1517.
Yeah.
And it's I always try to keep in mind as a historian, Arianism was around for 700 years.
Right.
At one point in the church's history, there were more Arian bishops than Orthodox bishops, and yet the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople still gave us the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. So Protestantism is not going to take us down, and it's got 200 years left. So that's what I like to say. It's on its way out.
You're on the clock.
Yeah. So I say that not to be rude, but I really do think it's on its way out. I mean, historically, you can see the trends. And so historically, there's this sort of fortress mentality following the Protestant Reformation where, the church couldn't change a lot. There was a lot of talk in Trent, in the Council of Trent, about the baptismal priesthood. It didn't make it into the documents, but it was being discussed. We have the historical record. And the Council Fathers were saying, well, we should emphasize this. And they said, well, we can't because Martin Luther butchered it and is now putting forward this idea that there shouldn't even be a cleric. So we can't talk about this or it'll be confusing.
Right.
So that's highly unfortunate because I really do believe that that's part and parcel of active participation and really entering into all of these graces that the Lord wants to give us. It's not to say that it didn't happen over the last 400 or 500 years, but the intentionality that we could bring would increase our disposition and allow us to receive more graces.
Yeah.
So there's that piece. And even in the Council of Trent, there was some discussion about some use of the vernacular because Latin wasn't used anymore. It was no longer an active language. And the liturgy in every other circumstance except for the Roman Rite has always been intelligible to the people. Always. Even in the Byzantine Rite, the Ruthenian and Ukrainian Catholic churches, they would use Old Church Slavonic. Well, people don't speak Old Church Slavonic anymore. They speak Ukrainian, or they speak in the Ruthenian Rite here in in the United States, it's English. So there was no issue with using the vernacular because they always used the vernacular. I mean, even in the early church, the Roman Rite used Greek for the first almost 300 years of the church's existence. Latin was first used in Africa, and it only came to Rome in the 300s, late 200s. So there was that question of the vernacular. The people need to be able to understand what's going on to some degree so that they can enter into the sacred action. But again, the Protestant reformers are using all vernacular, and we don't want to look like that. We don't want to confuse people more in this crisis. And so again, there's this fortress mentality. So what is it about Vatican II that says, like St. John the 23rd, let's open wide the doors of the church? It's not to let the riffraff in. It's to allow people to gaze upon the beauty of what's in the church. Not to tarnish the church, but to bring the church to the world.
Yeah.
That's the charitable reading of what he was calling for and what I truly believe he was aimed towards.
And that's certainly the direction that, well, I mean, really, so, Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict, that was very much their understanding of, throw open the doors and windows was to let the church back out into the world. We've been behind the fortress wall. And I think historically you can make the argument fairly successfully that was a necessary step at that moment. But that also means that necessarily then, again, both historically and ecclesiologically, there's going to be a necessary discernment somewhere out ahead of 1570, where we're going to have to ask ourselves, is it time to move out of the fortress mentality? Has it done its job? We locked things down, we secured it, we fortified it, and it weathered the storm. Okay, now when do we go back into mission mode? When do we go back out? And so that rubric for Vatican II is of course very much how Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict saw it, and that you see that reflected in their, I would say their papacy, yes, but really in their entire priesthood, in their entire ministry was very much we have something, not a new thing, the same thing we've had for 2,000 years. We have something for which the world is dying. It's starved of this. Yeah, and so we have to find John Paul II's new evangelization, of course, new in ardor, new in method. It's aimed at this problem of how we begin to take the gospel back out into a culture. And as I've said, again, to use a historical overlay that I want you to just kind of take this and run with it, but there's many things that are unique about the world around the church at Vatican II and since.
Yeah.
In some sense, not entirely unique. Human nature is fallen human nature since the garden. Satan plays the same boring notes over and over and over again, but he's very good at subtly masking them and making them look and sound new, etc. But one of the things that I think is just an interesting idea to kick around and play with, in a sense, we're similar to the early church in that we're an island of oddballs surrounded by an ocean of paganism. And the mission is the same: go therefore and make disciples of all nations. The marching orders are exactly as they have been since Matthew 28. The first Christians, the early church, had to go out and evangelize the pre-Christian pagans, for whom Christianity was like a new sun had risen in the sky. We have to evangelize the post-Christian pagans, for whom Christianity is a yawn, is it had its run and good riddance. It's outlived its usefulness. It really ought to shuffle off stage left at this point. It has nothing relevant to say or useful to offer. But just your view of kind of where are we right now, and then what does that mean? What are we supposed to be doing, and how are we supposed to be doing it? Do you see things that we're doing effectively that you think, that's we're hitting that one on the nose?
Absolutely. I mean, that's it's kind of where that trajectory is going. I mean, we have mass media, We have this globalized society, for good or ill. It's not going anywhere. And one of the things that's true about John the 23rd, Paul the Sixth, JP2, Benedict, Francis, is World War II. I mean, this is the big thing. You can't separate Vatican II from World War II. And it's a direct correlation, because you see this world that absolutely needs grace, needs Christ, needs the gospel reproposed. There's so much disillusionment. I mean, you just read the accounts of the soldiers coming back from war, from World War I or World War II.
Yeah.
And they are, and many times, adrift, godless. They don't know what's true and what's not true. Life has been cheapened. This is why Pius XII declared the dogma of the Assumption. It's like, we're body and soul. Your bodies matter. You matter. You're not just cannon fodder. He didn't say that, but that was the point. And that was in 1955. Well, skip forward just a few years, and now you have the Second Vatican Council called after John the 23rd wrote Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth. So it's all related. So this idea of opening wide the doors of the church, I certainly wouldn't have been caught dead saying what I'm about to say a few years ago, but I'll say it now. The Latin Mass is the Mass of Ages. It is beautiful. It is transcendent. It's reverent. It's glorious. I love it. I go to St. Ed's quite a bit. And just to clarify, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Society of St. Pius X or the Sedevacantists or the crazy rad trads online. Whenever I'm caricaturing the trads, it's them. St. Edward the Confessor, Mater Misericordiae, great parishes. Father Passo is probably my favorite traditionalist priest, because he's so balanced. He really is a good guy. Very smart, very solid, great approach. So just want to make that caveat. But if we put the quote unquote the Latin Mass, which is really, I call it the Mass of 1962, the 1962 Missal, if we put it up on a pedestal as the way to do Mass, and everything else needs to be compared, then we fall into this trap of saying that the Mass of the last 50-something years is inferior, which I will not do. I'm not going to do this comparison. I'm not going to say that the Byzantine Divine Liturgy is less or more than the Latin Mass. I've also heard people say that the 1962 Missal is the Tridentine Mass. That's not historically true. It's not the Mass of the Council of Trent. There's been 3 revisions since then. And the 1962 Missal is actually quite different from the pre-1955 Missal. Ask the Sedevacantists. They won't use the 1962 Missal because they say it's too different. But there's so much historical illiteracy on this that it's kind of hard to cut through. But when we come through the Second Vatican Council and we see this renewal, it comes from over 60 years of the liturgical movement. All these great sons of the church who were gearing us up to actively participate in the liturgy. And they saw the liturgy as the source of grace, as a source in itself, not just something that we do, not just something where the priest goes and says the right words, does the right things, and then we receive grace. That's transactional. It's about a lived relationship with Christ in his church, the mystical body, which is another, I haven't even mentioned the mystical body of Christ theology. That's huge. And Pius XII brings that up in Mystici Corporis in the 1940s, during World War II, actually, saying we are one body of Christ. But that theology is what's needed for this post-Christian pagan world. This world that everyone is lost adrift, doesn't have a sense of belonging, is searching for meaning, doesn't know if the church has anything to say to them. Well, the mystical body of Christ theology says that, at the Mass anyway, that the priest is offering the sacrifice at his hands, yes, as the head of the body of Christ, in persona Christi Capitis, so the head of Christ, the head of his body, but that the people present are offering the same sacrifice as members of the mystical body of Christ. There's a belonging, even inherent in that theological concept, which is St. Paul. It's not new, but it was reemphasized. Why was it reemphasized? So that we could have the liturgical reform of the 1960s. So anyway, that phrase that I said I wouldn't say a few years ago, I'll say it now. The Latin Mass needed to change. We've never had one liturgy. It's never been static. It's always grown. I mean, if you study the history of the liturgy, this is just the case. It's never been static. It has to adapt and morph and grow and develop. I've heard people online especially say that the liturgy is like a monument that has now been covered and tarnished and changed. It's not a monolith. It's not some sort of stone statue. It's a living thing because the body of Christ is living. The church is us. The church is the church triumphant, certainly, the church suffering, and the church militant. So it's the angels and the saints. It's the heavenly liturgy here on earth. It's so much more than just one missal. And that's not to put down that missal at all. It caused in me a great conversion. My first going to the Latin Mass was a truly formative experience for me. It was one of those moments that we talked about earlier that like flipped the script in my head. So I don't want to knock that at all. That's not the point. But the Novus Ordo, quote unquote, I don't even know if we should call it Novus anymore. It's 50 years old. At what point is it no longer new?
At what point does it get to just be Ordo?
Yeah, right. Or just the Mass of the Missal of 1970, or the Missal of St. Paul the Sixth. I think that's another terminology that could be used. And I don't know what the future holds, but the things that I see that are happening now, the good things, are an increase in the study of Scripture. That's the direct result of Vatican II. No one can tell me otherwise. Dei Verbum literally called for us to study Scripture more, and the Church answered. And that's a long line. St. Pius X absolutely founded the Biblical Institute and really got that going, Divino Afflante Spiritu, and all the other things that he wrote about Scripture study. But Vatican II picked that up, ran with it, sent it out to the whole world that the Church venerates the Scriptures as she does the body of Christ. So, okay, let's study the Bible. It's not a Protestant thing. It's our book. Let's take it back. Yeah. I think that's a good thing. I think that people taking an interest in the liturgy is a good thing. There's more people learning what the Mass is and how they can enter into it. And it's not activism. They are learning what's actually happening in the rite itself, which is just good liturgical catechesis. Parents are teaching their children. They're taking their kids to church. And it's not I'm forcing you to go. This is what we do as a family. One of the other things with the mystical body of Christ is seeing, I think that parishes are a collection of domestic churches. They're a church of domestic churches. And when we really live that, when we understand that, then families start supporting one another in a way that maybe they didn't before. And certainly, maybe they did before because it was the social context. So historically, I think your idea of a Christian versus post-Christian world is very true. Christendom is done. It's over. We're in the apostolic age, as Monsignor Shea would put it.
Right.
And he's completely correct.
Yep.
So if you're living in Christendom, I'm not going to say you can go through the motions and you'll be fine. But if you went through the motions, you'd be living an inherently Catholic life. Right? Because Christendom is Catholic, at least until the Enlightenment. Or the Reformation at the very least. So there is sort of this active participation in the life, in your daily life, where it's Catholic. You go to Mass, you say the Angelus throughout the day when the bells ring. Even if you're in the field, you drop what you're doing, you pray the Angelus. Like there's these little things that we've lost. And I see people trying to reclaim those. All these different groups. And to give credit to the traditionalists, quote unquote, a lot of that heavy lifting has been done by traditionalists.
Yeah.
So I certainly don't want to knock that. I think you and I have the same sort of experience. I think the majority of traditional Catholics, quote unquote, that I know are just good people who love Jesus and want to expose their children to the very best of Catholicism.
Yep.
So it's certainly not a bad thing. I'd take that any day over the majority of the nonsense we've got going on in the world.
Right.
But I think what my approach is with the traditionalist camp is they're so faithful. They love Jesus so much. They love the Mass so much. But there's so much historical and theological illiteracy. And it unfortunately leads to, and I don't want to open a can of worms. Yeah, I do. Oh, am I kidding? I love opening cans of worms. Pope Francis spoke about a rigidity in traditionalist circles, and that caused waves everywhere. Like, how dare you call me rigid? I think it's a perfect word. I think that's the exact issue. It's not to say that those people are rigid, but a lot of the things that they're doing are. And so I think the rigidity comes from not bending, so literally being rigid, on the things that you ought to have some give and take. It's not putting first things first and second things second. It's taking everything as if it has to all be the most important thing. An example of this would be the Rosary. I love the Rosary. I love Mary. I think everyone should pray the Rosary. But I certainly would never say that you have to. It's not necessary for salvation. It's highly encouraged, and I think you should, by the way. But it's not necessary for salvation. And the thing that got me over the hump on that was talking to my Byzantine Catholic friends who that's not part of their tradition.
Right.
They have other beautiful, like the Akathist hymn, like that's a beautiful devotional to Mary. And inevitably, I don't hear, well, in sacred scripture it says, or in this church document it says, it's, well, so-and-so said that the third secret of Fatima actually said, here we go, with the private revelation being put above the gospel again.
Yeah.
It's just like those kind of things. That's a rigidity that needs to be gone. That's not Catholic. It's a misprioritization that needs to be done away with. We need to be putting the gospel first. And that means the Mass should be done well. So like when Traditionis Custodes came out, I read it. It made me angry. I thought, this is horrible law. I mean, just as church law, it's just terrible. I mean, for one thing, it says that the unique expression of the lex orandi of the church is the ordinary form, the Novus Ordo. That's clearly, obviously false.
Right.
It's not the unique expression, because in the Ecclesia Dei Commission, it says that the Latin Mass can continue in the FSSP and ICKSP and all these other groups. So that's just clearly false. So what else in this is wrong? And so it just didn't seem like good law. Come to find out, it was ghostwritten by Andrea Grillo. It was a professor in Italy who had just read one of his books, and suddenly it's all making sense to me now. But
so there's another fingerprint is on the pen.
Yeah, there's another fingerprint, and I'm like, that makes sense now. But does that stop what's in Traditionis Custodes about saying, if you reject Vatican II, you are not Catholic. If you reject the Missal of 1970, you are not a faithful Catholic. I think those things are still true. So it's a complicated picture. And so I think the way that I approach it is I expect more from the people who love Christ the most. I expect them to be more educated, to not just settle with so-and-so told me this, or so-and-so voice on the internet said such and such. Like there's some voices on the internet that I think are doing irreparable harm to souls.
It's a tricky thing on the internet because, of course, we all of us, just being human, and given a tool like the internet with the way it functions, the way it builds algorithms and begins to say, it's hard not to build an echo chamber.
Oh yeah.
It's hard not to. And I think I would say even more than it's hard not to build an echo chamber for yourself online, it's also hard to recognize that you have built an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Until you've got a pretty solid echo chamber. Meaning just, and you know, now we've all had some glimpses behind the curtain of how this stuff works. So you realize there's algorithms that, you know, begin to slide things in a direction and then begin to filter stuff out. And it's all calculated to make sure that we're clicking and engaged and staying there and emotional about whatever we're clicking on. So small wonder it fuels this fire, which is why one could possibly make the argument the internet is not the best place to adjudicate these questions for Catholics. That being said, here it is, and it's here to stay, and so we need to figure out how to do that well. As
we record a conversation to go out on the internet.
Exactly right. So this will inevitably end up in some people's echo chambers.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, that's
right.
what Will Wright said so.
If you think I'm in your echo chamber, just kick me out. That's
no
fine.
less an authority than Will Wright.
That's right.
On this random podcast.
God help us.
I wanted to ask you. So you teach high school.
Mm-hmm.
You teach history. You teach theology. Having myself taught high school, and then community college, so young people, you get a privileged glimpse of culture. Mm-hmm. There is maybe no better place to take the temperature of where exactly are we right now than to spend time with young people. Like they will reveal very quickly. I've always been a proponent of there's no such thing as an entirely negative culture. There's no such thing as there are no redeeming qualities, there are no positives here whatsoever. That being said, it can tilt pretty steeply in directions that are not necessarily going to be great. I've over the years I've come back to over and over again two brief quotations, observations that say very much the same thing. From the two sides of the Second Vatican Council. So in Gaudium et Spes, I believe it's 36, says, without the Creator, the creature vanishes, and when God is forgotten, the creature itself becomes unintelligible. Mm-hmm. Well, welcome to the 21st century. When God is forgotten, the creature itself, we know we've lost our grip on what we even are. We're unintelligible to ourselves.
Yep.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great author and Russian dissident, had that exact same observation. He gave a presentation, I think when he was awarded the Templeton Prize in the early 80s. He gives this presentation at Harvard in which he basically diagnoses the problems with both communist Russia and the capitalist West as men have forgotten God. And he made the interesting observation connected to that. He said, when I was a young man, atheist, socialist, as he was before he got thrown in the gulags, he said, the old women of my village would wag their heads and click their tongues and say, men have forgotten God. And I used to think, what simpletons. First of all, they're seeing problems where there's this great future before us. Yeah. And he said, now as an old man, having lived through what I've lived through, and seriously, men have forgotten God. That's what's wrong with the world. Through the lens of the young people that you teach, where are we? What describe our culture as you see it through that lens, and then you bring the wisdom of someone who has a larger perspective. You're older, you're more educated, you have, and what are the things that concern you, but also what are some signs of hope? What are some things that you see that are actually encouraging?
Well, I think that the freshmen that we get at the school are nowhere near the same people as the seniors who leave. And that's true of any school. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more true of our school for two main reasons. One is we're privileged to have the Sisters of St. Cecilia running our school, the Nashville Dominicans, which is, you can't get better. They're amazing. Yeah. And so they bring that charism of St. Dominic and just the way that they live their lives, joyful orthodoxy, even keel, not trad, not progressive, just Catholic. And they allow a lot of diversity. They tolerate a lot of diversity where toleration is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And so I think that charism is really strong in our school. The other thing is our ethics program, which I believe we're the only school in the diocese that has a 4-year ethics program. Every single semester, the students take religion class and ethics class. So they're getting philosophy and theology all throughout.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
Wow.
Junior year, they're taking bioethics and they're learning arguments. It's really a truly remarkable. The first year they talk about the human person all year and like what that is, what that means.
Is that something that the Nashville Dominicans brought to the school?
Yeah, they had it at St. John Paul the Great in Virginia.
Wow, that's great.
And it's a phenomenal program, and it's an intentional focus of our school. And I think the third element, and this perhaps it's because we're a new school, our principal, Sister Mary Jordan, has interviewed and hired every person on staff. And so she knows that everybody's on board. It's a truly remarkable and beautiful thing where every faculty member is not only Catholic, but is a practicing Catholic and cares about that. That's not the case anywhere else. Mm-hmm. Not to cast aspersions on any other high school diocese, but I know that's not the case.
Yep.
So when you have that, we created this community, this environment that I think is ideal to welcome in teenagers today and form them to be better human beings, better followers of Christ, to facilitate an encounter with our Lord. So the reason I say that they're not the same kids, freshmen as seniors, is to say that we do see the culture. They can't help it. They live in it. They're only with us for a few hours a day. So even at their very best, we still see glimpses into what they deal with on a daily basis, who they are. Now, a little bit about our demographics is, I think 60 to 70% of our students are Hispanic. Around that same number, I think 70% are on full scholarships. So it's not an affluent school by any means. And demographically, we're certainly like predominantly Hispanic. And that brings with it some interesting cultural things. So culturally Catholic, but not necessarily practicing. That's very strong. A lot of the families are, I think by the 4 years that they're there, their child actually encourages them usually to go back to Mass, to resume a practice of the faith. So that's a beautiful evangelization there. But as a teacher, when I'm interacting with them, some of the things that concern me, I was just talking with someone about this earlier today, is social media. Social media is from the pits of hell, as far as I'm concerned. It's a horrible thing. I say this as someone with a podcast with over 100 episodes. I did it. I was trying to ride the algorithm, and I've given up. Not given up. I've intentionally stopped trying. People end up still finding my stuff. So, if it's just to show if you make good stuff out and put it out there, people will find it. So you don't need social media. But for these teenagers, the stakes are so much higher, especially for the girls, because the way that social media works for them is they're constantly having to measure up to these unrealistic standards that they're seeing, because it's other people's lives in their best, most curated moments.
Of course, yeah.
And then you also have the other thing. Last year I had a student come to me and after class and say, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" And she said, "Oh, this guy that I like followed this other girl, and I don't know what to think of it." And I was like, "Delete social media." She said, "Well, what should I do?" Delete social media. That's for your good, for your own good. Delete social media. If you want to go and talk to this guy and ask him what's up, that's fine. But the first thing you should do is get rid of Instagram and Snapchat off your phone, like right now. Just delete it, because it's not good for you. Now, by that point, she was a junior, and I asked her, "What do you think about that?" And she said, "Yeah, I've been thinking about doing that for a bit. I probably should." So sometimes they get there on their own. Sometimes they need some help. But what I found over those 4 years is, because we also are a cell phone free school, which is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
So we have to train them to talk to one another in person.
Oh, I love that. So
again, it's not a normal teen experience, but it goes to show that even in those cultural circumstances, with because we are all a product of our generation one way or another, they're able to disconnect from the internet and cell phones and all of that. And they're able to engage in real substantive conversations, talking about the things that really matter, engaging with philosophical concepts, engaging with theological concepts, heavy concepts, difficult concepts. And they can do it. And this isn't just the AP kids. This is everybody. They all go through the same 4 years. And so by the time they are seniors, if they leave the school and they leave the practice of the faith, I'm 100% certain that they know what they're walking away from. And I also trust that they'll come back. I mean, they might have that rebellious phase for a couple of years, but they can't say that they didn't know the truth. And that's a heck of a lot better than almost anywhere else. But what's given me hope, so to answer your question on that part, is how receptive they are to it. Which is, I mean, that's a big deal. We can talk until we're blue in the face, but if they're not receptive to it, then who cares?
Right.
So they really do listen, and they do care, and they grow in faith. I mean, our mission is to facilitate an encounter with Christ. We say this every morning, and we talk about the 4 pillars of the Dominican charism of prayer, study, community, and service as disciples. Like, they hear that every morning, and we live that, and we hold each other accountable. We have a house system. It's like Harry Potter. We got 6 houses and small groups within the houses, and so like nobody's forgotten, nobody's left out. But in religion class and ethics class, history, math, science, doesn't matter. They're engaging with the world. They're engaging with the content at hand, but they're also engaging with the questions that matter most to them. And sometimes, I have conversations with the students where they say, my family doesn't really practice, but I remember this one girl, she said, I was laying in bed last night thinking to myself, there's got to be something more. I was like, what do you mean by that? It's interesting. More to what? She was like, to life. I'm like, okay, where did you go with that? And she said, I don't know. I just think how did she put it? She said, I just think I haven't really been open to God. Like, I've learned about him, and like we go to mass and I pray kinda, but not really, not with my heart. And so I tried it last night. I'm like, how'd that go? And then she started crying. And I was like, okay, well, compose yourself and then tell me what happened. She said, I just asked Jesus if he was real to make it feel real. And it was like I was getting a warm hug. And then everything that I learned in religion the last 3 years just kind of made sense.
Wow, praise God.
And I was like, okay, that's what I'm talking about.
Put that one in the win column.
Well, and this is the same girl who just a couple months earlier was telling me that she was into some pagan new agey stuff because she was spiritual, but not religious, right? She was interested in this or that kind of new agey concept. And I asked her after this conversation, I was like, what do you think about all that? And she was like, superstitious nonsense. I'm Catholic. I'm like, yeah, you are. Get on with yourself. So like those kind of, like, that sticks with me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of those. And some aren't as dramatic. Some are small. It's that moment when I take the kids into the chapel for prayer during class, and you see the one kid who was just joking around with his friends and acting like, he's all cool and whatever. And then he's just not looking around at all and just kneels and starts praying. Mm-hmm. And you could tell he's in it. It's him and Jesus. So it's setting up those encounters. So yeah, it's a post-Christian world, but the Catholicism that we are offering to them is just pure unadulterated Catholicism. It's not, there's no agenda. It's let's introduce them to the Lord and see what he does and form a community that allows them the freedom and safety to do that.
Yeah.
That's all they need. They don't need sort of indoctrination. Mm-hmm. They just need the space to be human, authentically human. And they run with it. And I guess I would say this, if anyone's watching and they're like, I don't know about kids these days, they're capable of more than you think they are.
Yeah. Yep. Well, including that openness. That's beautiful. All right, good. I think that's a good place to wrap up. You've done yeoman's work here, sitting across from me and taking the barrage of questions. So I first of all appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. It's been a very enjoyable conversation. Glad you're out there on the front lines at John Paul II doing the Lord's work. Good distinctions, although it's kind of on hiatus now while you're hammering
It's all still
away.
there.
The dissertation, that's right. It's there. People should go look it up. Lots of great conversations and blogs and stuff to benefit from. So,
Thanks.
yeah, thanks for being part of this.
Thank you.
Keep me in prayer. I'll do the same for you.
Absolutely.